Greetings to you wherever you are in the world, and welcome to the Virtual Global Forum series. My name is Wendy Osborne. I'm a senior consultant with IAVI, and on behalf of IAVI and the Emirates Foundation, I am delighted to welcome you to this second session in our Virtual Global Forum series. We have had over 1,100 people register for the series to date, so all of these forums are truly global experiences. The COVID-19 pandemic has emphasized how volunteers as agents of change provide the practical action that builds hope and resilience, improves lives and strengthens communities. The pandemic resulted in the postponement of the October 2020 IAVI World Volunteer Conference to be hosted by the Emirates Foundation in Abu Dhabi. The conference will not be held in the autumn of 2020, will now be held in the autumn of 2021. However, the conference theme chosen for 2020 of volunteering together to enable change and create a better world has never been more relevant or more real. It seems fitting to give this forum series that same title. As part of the preparations for the conference, the Emirates Foundation had agreed to support the writing of 7 context papers on the conference sub-themes. Although the conference has been postponed, this project has continued. It aims to provide opportunity for greater consideration of important issues, including with relevance to volunteering and COVID-19, and to enable wider dissemination of knowledge that will add value to those supporting and developing volunteering around the world. The context papers will be published and available between July and December. The publication of each of these context papers is aligned to the series of virtual global forums, and I would like to pay tribute to Mosen Gull, the author of the context paper associated with today's forum. It is an excellent piece of work and I commend it to you. We hope the forums will be of interest to volunteer involving organisations, academics, policymakers, corporations, volunteers, and anyone interested in volunteering. A copy of the relevant published context paper will be provided to each person who registers for a forum, and following each webinar, the paper and the forum recording will be made available to anyone interested. If you missed the first webinar, please go online to access the information. Now to some technical information. On the screen, you will see an overview of the meeting room controls. There are 3 points to highlight. If you're having trouble with your computer's audio, try using your phone by selecting phone call under the audio tab. There's a small hand icon on the control panel. During the session, you may be asked to raise your hand to provide non-verbal feedback. This is the icon to press. Most importantly, there will be a question and answer session as part of this forum. So send your questions by using the questions tab. No need to wait to pose questions. You can write them at any time. As I said, this is a forum series and there will be another 5 webinars between now and December. Check out the dates and please put them in your diaries. Today's forum is on the topic of future leadership, the role of youth volunteers. I have spent over 35 years working in the field of volunteering, and a part of this work has always been about encouraging and enabling young people to be actively engaged in volunteering, recognizing the value of the experience to their own development and the importance of creating a new generation of individuals who seek to make a difference to their communities and the causes they care about. It is an issue that is increasingly relevant, brought into stark focus by the current global pandemic. The world needs to support and channel the energy, passion, and commitment of young people into action and leadership roles to sustain and grow the volunteer effort. I am therefore delighted that today's moderator comes with the right experience and expertise to lead us through the rest of the forum. Felicity Walls is a passionate advocate of youth volunteering and leadership, with substantial experience leading programs to enable young people to fulfill their potential. Currently volunteering manager with WCVA, the national membership body for voluntary organisations and volunteering in Wales in the UK. She leads on youth volunteering, including a youth-led grant-making initiative. She is also the Wales lead for a UK-wide youth social action campaign, inspiring organisations and businesses to value the power of youth in volunteering and leadership. Felicity provides mentoring, coaching and training to young people, and in her most recent appointment as lead of the Future Leaders Network in Wales, brings young people together to connect, discover and become lead changemakers. So finally, I take this opportunity on behalf of IAVI and the Emirates Foundation to thank you, Felicity, and our other distinguished panel members for their input today. I know this is going to be a great session, and it's now over to you.
Thank you very much, Wendy, for the wonderful introduction. Gwyn Hawnda and good afternoon to all of you. We have almost 200 speakers joining us today from across the globe. And in this session today, we're going to be talking about youth volunteering, what it is and how it's evolving, whether youth volunteering should be youth-led, and what enables and prevents youth leadership in volunteering. It's likely to be a really interesting discussion, and I know that a paper was circulated beforehand, which you may have had the chance to have a look at, but if not, the presentation today will be touching on that information there. After the presentation, it will be followed by a panel discussion, and I will be introducing you to our panel members shortly. And as already mentioned by Wendy, there will be the opportunity for you to put your questions to the panel. So please, as we go through today, do pop them to us, and we'll be having a look through and putting them to the panel a bit later on today. But first, just to say a little bit more about my work. So as Wendy's mentioned, I work for Wales Council for Voluntary Action, and we believe that volunteers and voluntary involving organisations can make a really valuable contribution to the current and future well-being of people in Wales, and therefore we enable organisations to deliver services and support those that need it most. And obviously over the past few months, we've been particularly active around supporting people and communities through COVID-19 and the lockdown, helping people access what they've needed during that time. And in relation to youth volunteering specifically, our work with WCVA is as an advocate and champion of youth social action. And we do that through a variety of forms, which includes our grant giving, supporting people to access trusteeships, and creating and sharing resources that support organisations to do this. And also we're the lead partner in Wales for the UK I Will campaign. As Wendy also mentioned, I lead the Future Leaders Network in Wales, bringing together young people, and one of our panel members today is from the Future Leaders Network in Wales as well. And I also deliver training, coaching and mentoring to young people across Wales. So having heard that, you'll obviously therefore be aware that volunteering, young people and leadership are causes that are really close to my heart. And I feel really honoured today to be moderating this session for you on future leadership, the role of young volunteers. So I'm just going to ask Jessica to move me on to the next slide. So we know that the world is changing rapidly. We're living in a world where our population is slowing in its growth, but it's ageing, where technology is advancing, which creates new opportunities for us, but also challenges. And that also we're facing a climate and nature emergency, which is becoming more pressing on a daily basis. So to respond to these challenges, we need new and different approaches to leadership that will enable our future generations across the globe to flourish. And finally, with the coronavirus lockdown of young people, we also know that young people across the globe have been disproportionately affected by coronavirus and also the lockdown, and that some of these issues aren't going to go away. So as we consider the role of young volunteers in future leadership, we need to take into account the world is changing, what we need for the future, and the challenges that young people may face in getting there. Next slide, please, Jessica. So I had the pleasure of attending a volunteering youth conference last year, and Nicole Grillo, the Executive Director of IAVI, was there. And this was something that I noted down that she said on the day that I just wanted to share with you all. I think it's relevant to today's discussion, which is young people, this is your time, your era, and your chance to change the world. So on that note, I'd like to introduce you to today's presenter, Mohsen Gul from Pakistan. Mohsen is a policy entrepreneur who works at the intersection of youth engagement, policy and governance systems in Pakistan and the Asia Pacific region. He has a diverse policy and practice experience in system strengthening from a community of action lens and over 8 years of experience in the international development sector, and is currently providing research support to the UN Volunteers headquarters in Germany. His doctoral research work at the University of Nottingham and Oxford is focused on critically analysing how youth volunteering can be mainstreamed in multi-level sustainable governance processes in Pakistan. So I'm going to hand over now to Mohsen, and he will take you through his presentation for today.
Well, thank you so much, Felicity, for the kind introduction, and Wendy for the appreciation. We've spent the last few months working on this context paper, or coming up with some context around what future leadership could look like for engaging young people or youth volunteers effectively. So next slide, please. So from Stockholm to Solomon Islands, we've seen millions of young people coming to streets, at least in the past 1 or 2 years or before the lockdown, where they were asking for important or ringing bell around important issues of concern to them, including climate crisis, growing inequality, unemployment, and resource scarcity, and so on. And now with COVID-19, young people are being labeled by ILO as the lockdown generation. So we're seeing a lot of rapidly changing situation for young people. But one thing has stayed constant over the past at least 20 to 30 years is that youth volunteerism is on rise. Every third young person is volunteering. 600 million young volunteers exist out there in the world right now, and 1 in 5 young volunteers often does it through a formal volunteering platform or an organization. So you can see that youth are organizing themselves, they're exploring different decision-making models, they're rejecting the hierarchy and the bureaucracy that has existed, and they're challenging the system. And as Felicity rightly pointed out, what Nicole said, it's the time for young people to take the stage and show and prove whatever they say, how to leverage the potential of young people fully. But volunteerism, why is every third person volunteering a young person? So apart from altruism for a better world, young people are driven by magnitude of reasons to volunteer, right? From wanting skills to gain future employment, to keeping themselves busy, or for leisure only as well. And we're seeing new forms of volunteering appear or surface up, which didn't exist before. For example, online volunteering or digital volunteering. And with COVID-19, we've seen a surge in online platforms being used effectively for expanding young volunteers' contribution to their communities, to the technical skills they know, and so on. And now, not just digital volunteering, we've also seen rise in new modes of volunteering other than digital platforms. For example, micro-volunteering. Now, micro-volunteering basically means that, or we've seen traditionally that we like to work for, let's say, Red Crescent or Red Cross, and we tend to work with them for whole our life. We become this trustworthy volunteer. But young people often in this globalized and social media age, they don't have the kind of time on their hand, or they're not willing to commit that much. So micro-volunteering is where they go for a short-term volunteering activity with an organization, and then they go away. So the sector, volunteering infrastructure, is adapting to the changes and to the style in which young people want to work in the sector. Next slide, please. But that takes us to a key question before we go on to discussing about the ecosystem itself and the challenges. What is youth anyways? What is youth volunteering, and why is it defined as a separate thing to, let's say, volunteering itself? Now, youth volunteering is defined as activities which, with a positive social benefit, done to adolescents between the ages of 12 to 22 who volunteer for no monetary reward. Now, the definition is quite straightforward. Okay, it's unpaid, it's for the good, fair enough. But the problem comes down to the age group. Now, youth is not always defined as people between the age of 12 and 22. Youth is much more of a fluid category than a fixed age group. Now, for example, the United Nations defines youth as persons aged between 15 and 24, but in many country contexts or organizational contexts, they define it ranges up to 35 as well, or in countries like Nepal, it goes even up to 42. So the experience of being young can vary substantially around the world. So, for instance, geographic and socioeconomic context play a big role in how much time you'll have before you have a proper job, how much time you have to spend in the college, and so on and so forth. So the age group is not fixed. It's a fluid category. That's an important understanding to have. And then the other part of the definition is youth something we can put in a bigger category? Is it a homogeneous group of single type of people? Not really. It's not just defined by male youth and female youth. There are different ways through which young people can be defined through their ethnicity, through their religion, through their sexual orientation, through the status of whether they're refugees, their migration status, and within age group, whether they're adolescents or young adults, because their motivations and passions and challenges differ so broadly across the age range. A person who's 18 versus a person who's 28 may have very different aspirations in life and have to be targeted accordingly. Next slide, please. So apart from young volunteers themselves, as we saw that they're coming up and volunteerism is on rise, we are seeing, like I gave you an example of micro volunteering surfacing up or digital volunteering surfacing up. Governments and non-state actors like NGOs, international organizations, youth groups themselves, they're all responding to this growing potential for formal young volunteering, right? We are seeing volunteering laws being enacted in countries like Mozambique, Peru. We have seen in Bangladesh, a Youth Welfare Fund Act in 2016 was introduced to provide youth organizations with financial support from volunteerism. Then we saw in Tanzania, a national volunteering policy was defined, which directed the Ministry of Youth Development to serve as the coordinating agency for the whole volunteering work. So you can see the countries which face a big demographic bulge or high population number of young people, they're trying to mainstream young people within the whole civic engagement space. Then we've seen examples of non-state actors, for example, volunteering networks and federations coming together to create some platforms and solutions for youth volunteering. For example, in Azerbaijan, the Asan service was launched, which is like a website portal where about 1,000 young volunteers registered to link them up to experienced persons in public and private entities. So it becomes like a hub of experience sharing and opportunity network where they can go on to take internships, paid employment, or volunteer work at different organizations. So the point is that the volunteer infrastructure for youth is evolving. But as we speak, let's see an example. Next slide, please. So we've seen that this was happening pre-COVID, but then COVID happened and suddenly the world had to go into a new normal and new realities were forming, and this new threats and challenges that transcend borders right now, for example, like the global COVID-19 pandemic. So, but we've seen the power of young people as change makers already. 13 million first respondents that work with the International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement have led youth-led campaigns in Sierra Leone. And then we've seen examples how they've responded to the Africa Ebola outbreak, where a youth advisory panel was formed with the Plan International. And then on ground, we saw some concrete work which young people were doing. So there are so many examples which show that young people are often the first community respondents to natural and humanitarian crises, maybe as an avid or as a proper volunteer or as a part of their community. They usually are the first respondents. And similarly, the current COVID-19 pandemic created another window of opportunity for young people to find and lead this volunteer response in the management of the outbreak or the recovery that will follow this. A great example, which one of our panelists has also been a part of, is the Her Story Network. This has been formed with help of UN Women, and it includes 300 young women who are documenting reports of misinformation as well as collecting news concerning the COVID-19 impact on women's livelihoods, women in humanitarian context, violence against women and girls during emergencies. So they're really trying to bring out a simple key information that would help not just young women, but also policymakers and decision makers to create the right sort of interventions and opportunities for women to come out of COVID-19 without further marginalization or vulnerability. Now, the Her Story Network itself was formed in 2016 to close the gap of gender for knowledge gender knowledge gap on the Arabian Wikipedia. So in a way, it's like people coming together and trying to give away as much information which they think is legit and good. And we've seen since that they've also participated in different training sessions to advocate for issues of gender equality and COVID-19. This is a great example of seeing how young girls, besides having access issues and being in lockdown, they came together and they harnessed the power of digital space to respond to COVID-19 for a vulnerable group. Next slide, please. So we've seen that it's so important right now as a priority to channel this energy and passion which young people have or young volunteers have into leadership roles, give them the space so they can sustain and grow their own volunteer effort. And we really need to give them space to have a say in what volunteering leadership means to them, right? This calls for maybe reconceptualizing youth volunteering from the perspective of young people themselves and moving away from these traditional adult-led youth-focused approaches. Before we go on to understanding what youth-led volunteering or future leadership dependent on youth would look like, it's important to understand the youth can be very tokenistically engaged as a checklist item, like youth as beneficiaries. They're always seen as this tested group that needs our help, versus you start engaging them. But then the best way to engage them is to put them in major leadership roles and put them as the ones who decide. So we're youth deciding for youth and the kind of solutions they want to create. But that doesn't mean absence of adults. We can work together rather than one reporting to the other. But the leadership role really needs to go to the young people themselves, because we cannot keep telling them that we know better than you, right? So it is rooted in the belief that young people are valuable assets and resources, and their energies and talents should be brought on the table. A great deal of terminology you'll see in the youth literature around youth empowerment, youth engagement, youth mainstreaming, youth organizing. So you'll see these words coming up again and again. Unfortunately, for most of the times, we have not really been able to mainstream youth leadership into real concrete action. And for that, we'll see some examples later. But just to give you a sense of how youth leadership could look like in a certain organization context, let's see an example on the next slide, please. So Civicus is a World Alliance for Citizen Participation. It was established in 1993 and is dedicated to strengthen citizen action and civil society engagement throughout the world. They have been arranging different Civicus World Assembly, then they also do a youth assembly. So they're very well versed with working with young people, right? But very fairly recently, they've created a very good model where they have created something called the Civicus Youth Action Team. So Civicus is governed by a board of directors, membership advisory group, and then a youth action team, which is very interesting. This youth action team is a group of members who work for youth to be meaningfully represented across all programming of Civicus. Right, so they make sure that they're engaged in the alliance structure, the governance, strategies, and activities. It's a good model to see how institutionalization of young people's role could be done across organizational structures and activities. However, simply inviting young people to be a part of a leadership team doesn't solve all the problems. It doesn't mean that young people will come with the self concept of a leader or improved leadership skills. You have to create a whole infrastructure or a safe space for them to shine. You can't just bring them on the table and then they're the youth ambassador or the youth voice. But how do you mainstream that across your real work is the question we need to start asking ourselves from this day onwards. Next slide, please. This takes us to a very important question, which I might have just hinted here. Is it all good? Is volunteering or youth-led volunteering all this romanticized vision we have of it? We need to start acknowledging the complexity of the sector itself. Volunteering is not intrinsically good or bad. It's owing to the nature of doing good, but it opens up to debates around questions like who's volunteering for whom? Why are they volunteering? What does everyone get out of it in terms of the cost or the benefit to the individual and the social consequences of doing it? So we are seeing that a lot of young people, this rhetoric of, first it was rhetoric of disciplining young people, then it shifted to a policy rhetoric of empowering young people or leveraging the potential of young people. But that often has an undertone of something negative. For example, a lot of young people I've talked to in my research and elsewhere do not like to be called volunteer. So there's something wrong there. They want to walk away from the term volunteer, only maybe because they are then locked into something called waithood. Waithood is very common in countries with higher unemployment rates, where young people are constantly volunteering because they want to keep busy or they want to have work experience, but someone is exploiting that resource for free only because they are in a position to compromise on their decent work environment. Then we have seen that traditionally volunteer models are adult-led or they're adult-centered, they're created by them. So often you'll see young people rejecting the very hierarchical model of volunteering, or they would want to move away from this structured formal volunteering situation. So what we've seen is that not only one group, like adults, have the power to construct the definition of what is youth, they also have the power to act on those definitions and create the structures around us which push youth in further marginalization. So it's very important to see how we can open up these spaces for young people. For example, in the Her Story case study, we saw that young women are claiming more spaces of action in addition to their traditional caring roles, which do domestic caring roles for large number of population. Then we have also seen how in crisis situations specifically, certain tasks are always associated to femininity, and caring roles are usually assigned to female volunteers, and males are or tasks, for example, like first respondents to crisis are often assigned to male volunteers. So these spaces are gendered. These spaces have a lot more complex issues than they first appear. So we really have to acknowledge first that young people often do not have much say in the way they are engaged and should be engaged or should be engaged in the current volunteering practices. So we really have to see this. Next slide, please. So once upon a time, I was asked for a seat on the table at UNESCO. I was asking for a seat at a table for the executive board at UNESCO, a youth seat, but it didn't work because there was because there was no legal binding or legal way to bring a young person on the executive board. A, because they were not representing a country. B, they were too young to take such decisions. Do you see how much of speaking and talking and voice speaking truth to power has been already done probably, but now is the time to start acting and creating those implementation structures which are very much needed. Otherwise it will lead to further frustration in young groups, and that's not something anyone wants to sign up. Next slide please. So I'll give you another example where we tangibly saw that how do youth-led initiative works. UNESCO Asia Pacific, in collaboration with UN volunteers and UNFPA, did a mapping exercise, which I was involved with, and we identified 808 organizations and networks, but only 38% of these were youth-led. So there's a question to ask why the number of youth-led initiatives is low. But then only 60% of these initiatives were active. Others had either become dormant or young leaders had moved on to different career paths. So it's a supply and demand problem, which I'll tell you on the next slide, please. So one of the problem is the lack of appropriate youth-friendly support and capacity building, bureaucratic governance structures, discouraging intergenerational relationships, limited funds, limited resources, all those issues which like a social entrepreneur or a youth-led organization would face. But on the other hand, on the demand side of it, there's high burnout as well. Young people often are in a transitional life period, so they move on with their life. They move out of their current commitments. So there is high burnout problem as well. So it's something for us to really start thinking as a community or sector, how to effectively engage young people, but then how to keep them engaged throughout, or to change programs or structures so they feel comfortable and flexible enough to take roles as they deem necessary. So it's really important to start acknowledging some of these challenges that we face. Next slide, please. So what I did with the context paper, which I'd highly encourage you to read, is to look at opportunities which we can explore. So there's a need to reimagine youth volunteering from the perspective of young people themselves. We looked at some of the barriers, we looked at some of the drivers through which young people volunteer, but the role of facilitators is really important. How are we creating those mentors and role models or peer models in the sector? How are we working towards enabling the safe space of engagement or opening traditionally closed spaces to young people, and really leveraging the social capital or network and creating the right structures on ground. It's so important that we start applying a system-wide human-centered approach to the models of youth leadership in volunteering structures so that we can start better understand the issues around this capacity and sustainability. With that, I'll come to the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. You have my email ID here, and please feel free to ask any questions as you feel necessary, and I'll be glad to answer questions about the context paper as well. Thank you. Back to you, Felicity.
Thank you very much, Mohsen. So thank you for that presentation. It's really interesting to hear that every third young person volunteers across the globe, and that volunteerism is on the rise. But also contrasting that perhaps with the language that we're using around it, and whether that is something that young people feel comfortable with. And that state actors are taking action to mainstream youth volunteering, and that obviously volunteering is evolving, and particularly COVID and the lockdown has sort of pushed some of those doors open for that. And I really welcome the suggestion that young people are given the opportunity to lead, and that we think about what the challenges are for that, and also then how we overcome some of those challenges. And we'll put some of those questions to the panel a little shortly, in fact, now. So What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn to each of the panel members. I'm going to introduce them to you, and we'll be asking them for some short reflections on the presentation and their sort of expertise and what's important to them. And then we're going to move on to some of the questions that have come in today. So this is just a quick reminder that if you have got questions or comments or reflections, please do send them in to us now, and then once I've introduced the panel, we will put those to them. So I'm first going to introduce you to Amani. Amani is a member of the Global Youth Task Force on Beijing 25, which seeks to give access to volunteering opportunities for marginalised young people. Amani was elected for the Youth Local Council of Eastern Bani Said in Palestine and is a member of the Assembly of the UN Women Gender Innovation Programme, Agora. She was recently selected as a member of Task Force on the Generation Equality Compact on Women, Peace and Security in Humanitarian Action. Amani cares deeply about creating links and improving support to women and young peace builders, and increasing young people's pro-social civic engagement and democratic participation, particularly in high-risk contexts. We've also got Ryan with us today, and Ryan, just one moment. Sorry, Ryan. Ryan is devoted to the inspiration and empowerment of young people and is guided in his work by the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act in Wales and Article 12 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, which ensures young people have a right to a voice in all public decisions. He brings this to life in his many roles, and most recently as the Deputy Lead of the Future Leaders Network in Wales. Ryan started volunteering with the local youth forum in Merthyr Tydfil in Wales and quickly progressed to the role of chair. And in addition, Ryan has been part of the Youth Ambassador Scheme with Public Health Wales and a representative of the British Youth Parliamentary Assembly. Ryan's currently working towards qualified teacher status and it's exciting to be guiding young people into a bright and exciting future. Next slide, please, Jessica. We also have with us today Yvette, and Yvette is full of passion for youth leadership and currently works as the Regional Manager for Business Development for Middle East and Africa of ISAC, the largest youth-led organisation in the world. Yvette has 4 years of active participation in youth development and empowerment, taking on the Sustainable Development Goals towards economic empowerment. Before this, Yvette served as the Country Director for ISAC in Tanzania, where she led many initiatives targeted at building youth capacity. Yvette joined the IAVI International Board of Directors in 2019. And then last but not least, we also have Her Excellency Hassa Talik, who currently holds the position of Assistant Under Secretary of Social Development at the Ministry of Community Development and Chief Innovation Officer. Of her most notable achievements during her time at the Ministry of Community Development, Her Excellency founded a volunteerism axis within the ministry, alongside projects pertaining to the Year of Giving, which included 13 projects, policies and laws. In addition, she's a member of the Board of Director of Dubai Foundation for Women and Children and the Emirates Gender Balance Council. Her Excellency has held a wealth of prominent positions in different government, semi-private and non-profit organisations, which have spanned strategic planning, research, marketing, development and community service. So I invite our panel members to turn on their cameras, and panel members will now be asked to give their reflections and to give some details about what is most important about the topic. Each panel member has approximately 5 minutes for this, and Yvette, I'm going to invite you to come forward first.
Thank you, Felicity. I'm really excited to be here. I think when Moshin was doing this presentation, there were a few things that really, stuck out to me. And one of the things that he mentioned, which he also highlighted, was the fact that you have 1 out of 3 young people in the world that are volunteering, but then most of them are not really, alluding to the fact that they want to be called volunteers, because you have instances and situations where people tend to want to take advantage of the goodwill and then the passion that volunteers have, you know, to just exploit them and then not give them what their worth is, especially in certain areas. I think that young people possess the creativity, the energy, the determination to drive progress, and volunteerism can be a very, very great and important tool, or for universal strategies, you know, that can promote the engagement of youth as valued participants in promoting social, economic, and national development. But we don't really see that, you know, we see a lot of volunteers that have to take action by themselves. You know, you have different institutions or youth-led organizations, for instance, like ISEC, that, you know, have realized that there's a gap in the world, and we young people are standing up or standing out to take responsibility for that. But then these young people that are not entirely, you know, most of them are entirely without resources or the manpower or even financial capacity to be able to drive the changes that they see. And this is why I think that is really important for adult support or adults, you know, supporting volunteerism, and not necessarily putting adults in places of power where they can dictate what we can do, but, you know, putting us in places of power, you know, a place of leadership for us to be able to identify the challenges that we see in our societies and our communities, and then they support with what resources or their wealth of knowledge and experience, and maybe even finances if they can, to make sure that because we feel the impact of whatever challenges we have in our societies, you know. So I mean, I think it's a really, really great paper, and I'm really looking forward to, you know, having more discussion and share ideas on this.
Fantastic, thank you, Yvette. I'm now going to invite Ryan to turn his camera on and to join us. And if all of the panel members are also welcome to turn on their cameras as well. So Ryan, over to you.
Well, hello everyone. I don't know how many people there are, so I'm just going to start off with saying Prynawn da, bore da, noswaith dda. That is good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Ryan, and as been introduced, I am the deputy lead for the Future Leaders Network in Wales, and I started volunteering in my community of Merthyr Tydfil about 3 years ago now. And I just want to say as well on the presentation that we just had, how inspiring it is to hear that there's an international infrastructure kind of growing around youth volunteering now, and young people are getting more and more mainstreamed into volunteering. And I think with the recent, well, 2020 has been quite a year, hasn't it? We've had the COVID-19 crisis, which, as we've seen, has transcended borders, and young people have taken an active lead in that, in the response to that. But also as well, I think the BLM movement has been a massive issue this year, that young people really have taken a stand. In my own town of Merthyr, we've had a lot of young people, you know, down in the in the town square. They've been volunteering, they've been speaking out. So it's an extremely inspirational movement that's going on. I will try not to speak for too long, so please put your hand up if I go on for too long. But I just want to say that from my experience, about 3 years ago, I did something that changed my life forever. I went to a meeting of the Merthyr Tydfil Borough-wide Youth Forum, and there were about 30 young people there, never been there before. And in that sort of hour and a half I was there, I went from, you know, somebody, just another young person that thought that young people aren't that important, to thinking, oh my goodness, young people are going to change the world. And within a few months, I was the chair of that forum. And the biggest project that we worked on that was closest to my heart was a mental health project, which is another thing that's really come out of the woodwork in the last few years. Young people have taken such a lead in mental health and the awareness of it in this last few years. The young people that I worked with devised a project, a mental health toolkit. They wrote a magazine all by themselves. They produced a film all by themselves, and it was promoted. All the young people promoted it, and we had a launch in Merthyr that was actually televised on the BBC. So the Sunday morning politics show, Sunday Politics, it was televised on there, the launch was. And the project has now been adopted by many schools in the South Wales area, at least in Merthyr. So really that does show that young people, when young people get a sense that there's something that needs to be changed, something that needs to be done, don't underestimate their power, because they will do it. They will go forward and they will make an impact. So that's what I'm going to say about young people and the importance of volunteering. That's what it means for me. Diolch yn fawr, gwrando gyda fi. That is my Welsh. Thank you very much for listening. I'll hand over to the next.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to invite Amani to have her 5 minutes.
Yes, hello everyone, and thank you all for your inspiring words and presentations. It's really important, and I'm really lucky to be among you today. Actually, volunteerism is why I am here today, and it's why I was able to reach the positions or the platforms and the regional and global levels that I reached. And I was really proud while Mohsen was doing his presentation, talking about her story volunteerism or projects and campaigns, because I've been, since the very beginning, I was part of the Gender Innovation Program, Agora, and then I joined the Her Story campaign. And since the onset of the COVID-19, we've been working together, young men and women. It's important also to highlight that young men also have been engaged in this campaign, because it's really important to join the forces and to work together in order to combat injustice, inequalities, and to combat violence, especially violence against women. So it's important to mention that, yeah, it's true that the world is changing. It has been difficult for everyone, especially difficult for young people, because they're being excluded and they are experiencing a lot of challenges. Mainly, if we're talking about the Middle East, we're talking about conflict. If I'm talking about Palestine, it gets harder because young people experience lack of security and safety. They live under occupation since many years, and they lack the opportunities, they lack the access to these opportunities, access to even basic services. So they have many challenges to be able to even express their to showcase their skills, their capabilities, to contribute to the society. But aside from all of the challenges, the complications that COVID-19 crisis has resulted since last February, it highlighted the role of young people working in the front lines to contain the spread of COVID-19, and to also to tackle the implications on many levels in their societies. So they have been working in the front lines and emergency committees, in the humanitarian responses, and also in the defending the human rights, because we know that there has been really a lot of violations of human rights due to the lockdown, due to the the breakdown of the legal institutions and so on. So, but it's at the same time, it's really important to highlight the challenges that young people are facing, and also to raise the awareness of the decision makers and the community about the needs and priorities of young people, because this is the momentum. Like, we are in 2020, there has been a lot of important work on the global level, in the regional level, to include and to engage young people in the decision making. And one example of this is Global Youth Task Force on Beijing 25, that is comprised of 30 young people from all over the world, regardless of their background, of their ethnicity, gender, regardless of their religion, and it brings them all together for one mission, to fight for one mission, and to promote the gender equality and to combat violence in all forms. So this is really important, to go not only from the local to it's the local to global, but also from global to local. It's really important to share experiences, to share stories, and to learn from each other. It's really important for me as a young woman to learn from other young people about their modality of their work, about the approach of their work, about how they overcome the challenges. Because it's true that we live in different contexts, but we all share some similar challenges. We all share some issues and some causes as young people. So it's really important to learn from each other and to share. It's always important to share, and never. It's my advice to the young people is never to hesitate to talk about yourself, because it's really important. For me, I was inspired by a young woman. So I'm so proud when I receive, for example, feedback from young women or young people telling me that I was their inspiration. So it's really important to continue this for all generations. Another important thing is because Mohsen also.
Can I just stop you a moment so Yvette gets a chance to be introduced as well, and perhaps we can come back to that as we answer the questions. Would that be okay?
Yes, sure. Thank you.
Thank you, and it's wonderful to see your passion shining through as well. Yvette, over to you for your 5 minutes of reflections.
Oh, I thought I just did that already.
Oh, did you? Sorry, I'm just making sure I've done everybody. Is everybody? Yes, we have. Okay, so I can welcome Mohsen back with us, and then I can pass over some questions that we've had in from our audience today.
Her Excellency has to speak.
Oh yes, sorry, I knew there was somebody missing. Sorry, Her Excellency, would you please join us now for your 5 minutes of reflections?
Thank you, Felicity. Actually, I was very excited. I forgot about myself because I was listening to everyone else, and I can say at the beginning, Mohsen's presentation was amazing. I was very much inspired, and I can relate, and I'm sure that all of us here, or most of us, can relate to the presentation, to one slide or another. What he mentioned about the passion, the challenges, the opportunities, the excitement that all of these volunteers and the youth are having for volunteering is really amazing. What I can say here that maybe it's the right time to talk about this, because maybe many of us can see that the year 2020 is the year of change. Many things changed, priorities, jobs, education, health, and volunteering. Volunteering, of course, from where I come from, we've seen this changing dramatically. We had around 500,000 volunteers registered in volunteers.ae, and most of them are youth, male and female. They come from 134 different nationalities living here in the UAE. When we talk about the pandemic, only during the pandemic, which was also an opportunity to explore different opportunities and to explore people's passion and willing to help and support everyone else, no matter who is this person, from which background, from which religion, nationality, what is the need. Everyone wanted to do something for the community. And when we look at the sectors that people come from, we are talking about teenagers, we are talking about university students, we are talking about professionals. We had around 8,000 specialized medical background volunteers registered during the pandemic, only during the pandemic. So I think this was a big lesson to many of us. And the way it's changing, I think Mohsen also highlighted how different volunteering opportunities are coming up. And what I can say from where I come from, we introduced the virtual volunteering, which was also one of the solutions that were introduced during this pandemic, because many people, one of the challenges during the pandemic was having people in the field. We had many people who were trained and willing to go to the fields, whether it's medical, airports, sanitizing, different sectors or different places. However, others were willing to volunteer from homes. We saw housewives volunteering. We saw children volunteering, teaching others, keeping different people busy during during the lockdown. Another example, which was also mentioned during the talk, where Ryan highlighted, is the mental health. We had more than 40 professional volunteers who trained other youth to get engaged into these call centers, to support in the medical, in the mental health supports call center. So the way that it's across the globe, it's not only in different in specific parts of the world. And as was also mentioned, that we don't need to see only from Amani. I think when she mentioned it's globally to locally, and the opposite also. So what I wanted to highlight here and comment on what was mentioned, that volunteers, youth, when they come into volunteering, they bring different talents, different innovations even to volunteering. We've discovered this here in the UAE during February, post the pandemic, when we celebrate our month of innovation in February every year. We invited volunteers, and most of them who came on were youth, and we wanted them to contribute to something related to people of determination or people with a special need. We had artists, we had chefs coming on board just to train people of determination in certain skills, and that was in public with the engagement of the community, parents, children. So even the backgrounds of the volunteers are changing, and because of youth, it's not because of anyone else, because of the talent they bring and the new ideas they bring into the table. So that was my quick comment.
Excellent, thank you very much, Hessa. And so we're going to move into questions now, and I've just had a quick look at the questions that are coming in. Firstly, there's an overwhelming thank you to Mohsen for your presentation, very informative and also got people thinking. I'm going to jump in, because we've only got 10 minutes or so for questions, to one that we've had in from Matt, which is quite a practical question and to really help people think about how they move themselves forward. So it says, to all of you, what would be your top, let's say, 2 practical recommendations for volunteering involved in organisations looking to take meaningful steps to appropriately engage and involve young people? So Mohsen, I will come to you first, and then to Hessa, and then we'll go back through the panel. So Mohsen, over to you.
It's difficult for me to bring to 2 because I spent 8 months on writing a lot of recommendations for this. But my top one would be measure youth's contribution. The problem right now is when you don't economically evaluate someone's contribution, you tend to either undermine its importance, or you do not have an ecosystem where that is celebrated. So my first thing would be to measure youth volunteerism in terms of economic valuations, so that the people who understand numbers understand the importance of people they're working with. Secondly, we need a lot more evidence making and research. We need a lot more research on youth volunteerism in informal settings, in humanitarian crisis settings, so we can really come up with the good examples, and not just research coming from the global north, but from the global south. And not seeing volunteerism as something of a tourism thing or something when you do as a soft skill in your leisure time, but a community resilience tool. And that needs to be acknowledged from the very policy level, at all geographical levels, to an individual level as well, so they understand what thing they're really contributing to. Thank you.
Thank you. And Hessa, same question to you, the top 2 practical recommendations.
I will say, as mentioned by Mohsen, it's research and understanding the case itself. Research will give us more input and more kind of looking at the whole spectrum, looking at different cases and different people, different needs, challenges, what they are going through, why they are volunteering. Understanding this concept through research, through one-to-one interviews, probably comparing nations and comparing backgrounds and age groups, this will give us a very good indication. So coming up with the research and implementation of that as well.
Fantastic. And same question to you, Yvette.
For me, I think that, I mean, we definitely do have a few youth-led organizations already that are doing amazing work. So if there are other organizations that really want to get involved, they can, also do research and then find out how they can partner with these organizations already. Because yes, research is really great, but then there are other organizations, there may be few, but they're also doing really great work on the ground. And once you partner, the movement can become greater. The second thing I would say is, what is the measure of impacts that these youth-led organizations have currently had? If you look at communities where you have volunteerism that is driven by youth, and then the impact on their societies or economies, just like Mushin said, versus areas that do not have that, that can be a very, very valid point, to widen the scope as to what is the measure of impact for young volunteers in certain areas, and where can we also go to, replicate and create the same things that we are seeing in one society. So that's what I think.
Fab, thank you. And same question to Amani. I think you might be on mute, Amani.
Yes. For me, I think the top priorities for volunteering organizations should be making sure that young people are in the core of the decision-making process, are not only engaged in the implementation, but also in the design of the projects or the interventions and the response. It's also important to emphasize on it's really important what Mohsen mentioned regarding the appreciation, because especially during this difficult time, young people need a motivation to make to continue their work on ground, and volunteering institutions should take into consideration the well-being of volunteers as well. The protection and safety of volunteers are also very important, and this should not be overlooked, as the current situation, of course, in many countries where volunteers protection and safety, especially when we're talking about volunteers, it also includes human rights defenders, it includes nurses, it includes people who are working in the emergency response. So the protection and safety of young people is really important and should be the priority for these institutions. Thank you.
Fantastic. Amani, I'm going to come back to what you've just said there in a moment, but I'll give you a moment to think about it, because one of our questions that has come in is about how do we keep volunteers safe across the world in terms of coronavirus, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But I'll just, Ryan, I'll give you a moment to respond to the top two recommendations for how we do this.
I think that number one, there has to be a sort of a commitment with organizations to really be to take the legislation seriously. We've got the UNCRC, which is adopted by most countries in the world. Notably though, America, the United States of America, has not adopted the UNCRC. So I don't know how the voice of young people is taken in America, whether it's got the same gravitas as it would in this country and the other countries that have signed on to it. So I think that is the very first thing. We have to take youth legislation seriously. And the second thing is, organizations need to have a responsibility to have schemes in place. So Public Health Wales had, as speaking for myself, had a youth ambassador scheme, which allowed young people 11 to 25 to directly feed into the executive decision-making process. That is one organization, but I think if government organizations had similar schemes themselves, some do, some don't, I think we would see more of a change there. So number one, take the legislation seriously. Number two, organizations need proper ambassador schemes. That's my look at it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ryan. We've had a question in, and Amani, I'm coming back to you, but Motion, to help you prepare, we've had a question around how do we measure youth volunteering, and are there best practices for measuring behaviour change and social impact? So we'll come on to that, but before we do, Amani, in terms of the question around how do we keep volunteers safe, particularly in this period of coronavirus?
Sorry, Felicity, can you say the question again?
Yes, so how do we keep volunteers safe, particularly at the moment with coronavirus being a concern?
Yes, sure. So safe, it's not only about the physical safety and health safety. When I say safe, it's also about, because also I work in the field of human rights, and I live in a country that lacks safety and security, not only from the occupation, but also because we as a country, we also lack the protection laws and legislations that provide the safety and protection for young people, not only for young people, but for citizens in general. So it's really important to make sure that these volunteers, as human rights defenders, as the first line respondents to the COVID-19 crisis or any crisis, that to ensure that they have a safe space to express their to practice their rights, to express their freedom, to have freedom of speech, freedom of journalism, freedom of to demonstrate, for example, in the street. So it's really important to hold accountability of duty bearers for the violations of the human rights of young people, because they are talking about the intersectionality, when gender, it's not only gender, but also age plays an important role when we're talking about intimidation, we're talking about the violations of human rights. Another thing is also making sure that these young people who are responding to the implications of COVID-19 have their needs are being tackled, and the government and also the civil society organizations are providing them with the needed equipment, needed advice as well, needed tools to ensure their well-being. And unfortunately, in many countries, this is not the case. So young people are left behind. Not only left behind, they are not being supported in their efforts to contain the spread of COVID-19, to also to make sure that the community is doing well to respond with the needed support. So safety is about mental, physical, and psychological well-being. And first and foremost, when we're talking about safety and protection, human rights first.
Fantastic, thank you, Amanda. Thank you, and I'm glad that you've really raised the point that it is a broad issue when we're talking about safety. I'm really aware of the time, so this will have to be our last question. And so, Mohsen, I'm going to ask you to just have a 1-minute response here, which isn't going to do the question justice, but if you just can quickly give us some information on how we measure the impact of youth volunteering, that'd be great. Thank you.
Just before I talk about measurement for Amani, there's a very good tool by National Youth Agency in UK. They've created on a readiness scale with the color coding youth initiatives, and you can see that to see how safe a project would be for young people during this time. Secondly, on measurement, ILO, which is the International Labour Organization, has a whole manual on measuring volunteer work. Unfortunately, that is done for all demographics. What we need now is particularly to take that tool and contextualize it for young people, and specifically in developing country contexts where resources are limited. So that's a very interesting tool to use. Similarly, we are seeing some good work coming from UN Volunteers Global, that they have so many resources on measuring volunteer work, also for organizations. And finally, if I may say, a Commonwealth Youth Mainstreaming Framework is a very good tool which organizations can apply and audit how much of mainstreaming they've done already in their work and how they can do further. And finally, around youth leadership, I would say youth nowadays do not have much choice but to have intrinsically take up leadership roles because of the situation we are in. All we need to do is give them more space and support them to do so. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you, Mohsen. I'm afraid that we do have to come to the end of the session now, and unfortunately we haven't been able to get through all of your questions, but it has certainly been an interesting presentation and discussion so far. And I'd really like to thank you all for joining us and that have engaged in the session and submitted some questions. Just to say, the session has been recorded and it will be available for download alongside the paper. And we'd also like to invite you to submit any examples or learning from your leadership to IAVI, so that these can be shared more broadly. Ryan has kindly volunteered to bring your input into a blog that he'll be sharing widely with you all. And also we'll take a look at the questions and see if there's any of that that can be weaved in to our response as well. So if you'd like to submit anything, you can email info@iavi.org and we'll bring those together. So a very big and special thank you and diolch yn fawr to our presenter and to the panel members today for giving up their time to be here and share their thoughts on the topic today. And as mentioned at the beginning, this is one of a series, and the next forum is on the 23rd of September on tolerance and inclusion, volunteering, enabling community cohesion and embracing diversity. So it'll be a similar format, and there'll be a presenter and also some panel members. So please go and sign up for that if you're interested, and also let your colleagues know that that's happening. But finally, just thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you in September. Thank you very much, everybody that's come here today, and goodbye.